so much for joining us tonight as we commence our Spring 2013 Graves Lecture Series. Our featured speakers tonight are two distinguished scholars, friends of mine, and it's just an honor to introduce Dr. Wendy Waugh and Dr. Barb Limbach. Both of the speakers have received the Teaching Excellence Award, Teacher Excellence Award, and Barb Limbach's also received another one, the Nebraska State College Teaching Excellence Award. This is a true indication of their dedication to the students, and it's also a compliment to Chadron State College. So congratulations to both of you. It's an honor to have you. The title of their talk is The Power of a Learner-Centered Environment, Objective to Assessment. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Barb Limbach and Dr. Wendy Waugh.
Wow, thank you. This might be the first time we've presented sitting down.
It is. This is so
it's really
informal.
Nice. It's really nice. Well, I'll start telling you a little bit about us and our history and how we've got to be where we are today. Between us, Barb and I have over 40 years of teaching experience. I've been here a while. We have been working together for 20 years, and 10 of that we have spent, just the last 10 we've spent researching and developing and publishing in the area of critical thinking. The result of our efforts have been 10 national peer-reviewed presentations that were done over the last 10 years, and 9 different journal publications also peer-reviewed. In fact, one of those, to toot our horn a little bit, our article in the International Journal of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education, it was number 2 on the most downloaded articles in 2010 with over 10,000 downloads. So I think, not trying to sound like we're bragging, but to show that it's a topic that's really in demand. And we've had administrators and tutors and trainers and all sorts of educators seeking out ways to ensure that we're actually teaching critical thinking. So that's just a little highlight of what we've been doing. Barb, would you like to?
Okay, tonight what we are going to do is show you our highly successful interdisciplinary 5-step process that we have come up with. We designed this in 2009, and the process is built upon existing theory, best practices, a learner-centered learning environment, an outcome-based environment and assessment. And what we have decided and what we have used as we've used this process in our own courses is that when following the process, you can provide your students with a more purposeful learning environment, and you can encourage your students to have higher learning thinking skills. So the environment is learner-centered, which actually takes more time, more effort, more involvement, both from the teacher and the student. So although we really believe in our process, we also know that a lot of time has to be put into it, and we require a lot put back into it or with it from the student. But we do believe the process can be used in any teaching learning center or setting, and we have used it in our face-to-face courses, our online courses, our hybrid courses, and we really think that this has been very successful. When you have lifelong learning and when the teacher can create collaboration, a sense of community, active student engagement, and content that is challenging and learning, then you're going to create that lifelong learning experience. And that's what we hope you can get out of this 5-step process.
Well, this is what it looks like, but before I dive into this, I just want to preface it by saying that this is just going to be a quick overview tonight. And when we do this, when we present this, we generally do it in a workshop setting, and we actively engage the participants. We have handouts and examples, and we have them working the process from start to finish so that we're kind of practicing what we preach. But we obviously don't have time to do that. So it's just going to be a quick overview of the process itself. So it's a pedagogical process used to develop higher level thinking skills in students, and we use the terms higher level and critical thinking relatively interchangeably, one more descriptive and one more terminology oriented. And the research says that critical thinking is deemed necessary for quality life. It's also oftentimes part of a course objective and even part of a college mission in many cases, which is one of the ways that we started talking about critical thinking. We're like, hey, it's part of the mission of the college. How do we know our students are thinking critically? What can we do to make sure? And do we even know what it means? And both Barb and I were trained as secondary teachers first, and so we learned all about how to teach and write objectives and blooms and all these things. So we kind of, over time, have kind of put it all together. So the steps are, I'll just go through them quick, and then we'll go through each one with just a little bit more detail as we move forward tonight. The first step is to determine the learning objectives, what you'd like them to learn. The second step is to teach through questioning, and this is where that learner-centered concept comes into play, and as opposed to a traditional teacher-centered where the teacher stands up and professes what they know. In a student-centered environment, it's about getting the students actively engaged and responsible for their own learning. And questioning techniques is one of the ways that we do that. The next step is to practice before assessment. And the next is to review, refine, and improve. We're constantly always changing everything and reviewing and getting feedback. And then the last step is to provide feedback to the student and assess the learning. Now Barb's going to talk about step one.
Okay, before I go into in depth with step number one, we really believe that students need to be persuaded that learning is the central process of their education. And instead of students being concerned about what grade am I getting, we want the student to be more concerned about what am I learning in this course, what content am I learning, what content am I missing, what additional information do I need. And that's something you have to persuade the student to understand, which is not that easy to do. But we think this process will help in that direction. We also believe that they need to take responsibility for their own learning. And so when you try to incorporate within your classroom the idea that we want students to collaborate, we want students to also work on their own, we want students to teach each other, we want students to evaluate each other, we want students to evaluate themselves, and that we are going to constantly ask them for feedback so that we know what do they know and what do they still need to know. What are they missing? So in order to do this, we begin with step number one, and that step is to determine the learning objectives. So first you determine what the specific program or discipline, or sometimes in the case of FYI courses or capstone courses, you may be bringing together more than one discipline, and the course learning objectives. You need to decide what is it that you want your students to know. What do you want them to know when they leave the course? You want to target behaviors that require the student to perform using higher level thinking. And we propose that you use Bloom's taxonomy, Bloom's revised taxonomy, and many of you are probably familiar with that, but any taxonomy will work within our model that we have. So this next slide is Bloom's revised taxonomy, and you can see on the left column there are 6 levels of thinking. The first 3 levels, remember, understand, and apply, are considered the lower level thinking skills. And sometimes you may still need to use lower level thinking skills in order to find out where the students are, what do they know. And so basically you're asking the student to recall information, or maybe determine the meaning of some information, or to apply the concept to a given situation. And that's okay. We need to do that. But in order to have lifelong learning, to have a learner-centered environment, we need to get students to be thinking, or anyone in a teacher learner situation to be thinking critically, thinking at the higher levels. And those levels are analyze, evaluate, and create. So I'm going to go back a slide, and you see with this first step, I want to talk a little bit more about how our framework is designed. It's 5 steps, and within each of the 5 steps, there's 3 tasks. So it's called a 5x3 plan, basically. So in this first step, you have 3 tasks. The first one is to consider program and course learning objectives. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Let's say that you are teaching my course, Business Communications course. You might, in that first task for this step, determine the course learning outcome. And that outcome could be something like this. Students will communicate effectively and responsibly through speaking, writing, and listening. And actually, that's a course objective for the Essential Studies program for that course. Okay, so that's a course, and in this case, program objective for this area. Then your next task is to determine what should students know. And in this case, you would want them to be able to, or what they should know is to be able to effectively or actively listen, evaluate, and respond in a communication situation. When they can exhibit that behavior, when they exit the course, they've met that course objective. And then, or that course outcome. And then the last task is the objective. And in my example, you could have the objective of students will recommend writing and speaking styles fitted to the purpose of a message and adapted to the receiver. So I basically have taken an example, put it through that first step. That's what you need to do. And you can have more than one objective, more than one outcome for a particular course or program. So, moving forward, we get to go on to step number 2.
Step number 2. Okay, tutors, wake up, because this is for you. All right, we got the heads up that tutors should be here. When we've done tutor training in the past, this is something that we've really looked at to help. So the second step is to teach through questioning, and the concept isn't necessarily that it has to be a certain type of questioning, but it's a way of bringing students into the conversation instead of having them passively just sit there and listen. And you've all passively sit. Some of you sat passively and listened to me. Sometimes I go on and on. So this, again, is the student-centered, and it's about bringing the conversation and bringing people into the conversation to deliver the material. And what you want to do in this step is to develop appropriate questions and employ the questioning techniques in the classroom. In this case, in the classroom setting, it can also be done online. We did one whole presentation where it's all about how you do this online. And the third step is then to encourage the interactive discussion between the teacher and the learner, between the tutor and the student. And so let's start with the developing appropriate questions. So when you're preparing for a tutor session or for a classroom session, you want to prepare questions in advance. And then you want to think about what levels those should be at. And what you want to do is establish what they already know so you know where to begin. And one thing we know about critical thinking is you can't think critically about something unless you understand it. So they have to be able to perform at those simple recall levels before they can think critically about it. So let's say, for example, I just want my students to see, I want to see if they can remember a concept. I might say, define leadership. And I might develop questions in that area. And so I'll have them ready. And so I'll throw a question out and I'll have those prepared in advance. But if I want them to think at a higher level, the question might be more like, compare and contrast two leaders that you admire. And it's a much more open-ended, higher level type of question. So it's about looking at that taxonomy or whatever taxonomy you're using, and then plan your questions at appropriate levels to move them toward critical thinking. And I teach, my face-to-face class that I teach most often is an entry-level principles class. So I spend a lot more time at the lower levels, and then I try to pull them into the critical thinking as much as I can. So the appropriate levels is a very important concept. We always want to think about alignment. And anybody who's an educator here who's heard of Quality Matters, this is a big thing in Quality Matters. It's about aligning, making sure that the objectives, what you want them to learn, match the questions and the levels that you develop, match the activities that you're going to do, and then match the assessments in the end. So everything should be all a building so that they'll do well on the assessment, so they've actually gotten it. Then when you bring the questions into a classroom or a tutor session, then you can use those to draw information out. As a tutor, you never want to tell them the answer. You want to see if you can help them come to the answer. And so you can ask them questions. Well, define this, or do you tell me what you understand about this, and figure out where they are. And then you can start moving them more toward, well, if you were going to put that in this situation, what would it be? Or if we put a different number here, what would happen? And so it really gets them thinking, and then they can come to the answer on their own. And so one simple technique is just to use convergent and divergent questions. There's hundreds of different questioning techniques, and we obviously don't have time for that. But convergent, kind of like the word like you converge on something, it's the type of question that you want to come to one answer. So there's one right answer for that particular question. So it might be, a math problem that has a definite answer, or it might be a definition where you really want them to, like I teach Porter's 5 Forces, and I really want them to know that evaluates the industry. So I want that word industry in there somewhere. I'm listening for it. And that would be an example of a convergence. So then I know they get the basic concept. And then you can use divergent questions, which open it up, and really any number of answers could work. So then you can kind of see what they're thinking, kind of see where they're at. So I might say, what makes a great leader? Well, there are 100 different answers that would fit well for that. So the use of convergent, divergent questions is a great way to start. Now, one of the problems with that, and I had this trouble too when I first started using questioning techniques, was I had all these great questions, and then they'd answer, and then it'd just be dead in the water. Like, now what do I do? And so there are other ways to encourage the interaction, and we go into a lot more detail in this, but every classroom, every tutor session, every time training, you'll always have different types of people. And so you can use techniques to draw out the shy student. You'll all be shocked to know that I was the really shy student in school.
And I've drawn her out.
Yeah, she was drawn. You can blame her.
Yeah. I had to throw that in. Sorry.
It's true. I don't think I spoke the first 5 years I was here.
It is true.
So drawing out the shy student, kind of controlling the one that wants to talk all the time and answer every question. There are lots of great techniques. And so there might be the lazy student or the student who just doesn't know. You don't want to embarrass anyone, but you definitely have to set your expectations. You have to, I always, at the beginning of every class say, I expect that you will participate. And if it's a big class, I always break them into small groups, because they can participate in a small group in a more comfortable way until they're ready, and you can kind of gauge that. But you can rephrase questions. If they sit there like, oh, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, you can try to ask it in a different way. So rephrasing is a good follow-up. So when you ask that question and you're dead in the water, then you can go, well, what if I said it this way? What if it was your dog that da-da-da? So then they go, oh, well, okay, I can answer it that way. And you can redirect questions. Well, Sally, what can you add to that? You can always have, in fact, at first I always wrote them down in the corner. So I'd be like, okay, now what can I do? What do you think? Do you agree with that? Mm-hmm. Why do you agree? Oh, tell me more. There's a lot of little things that I used to write down. And now I just do it. And I always was amazed at kind of how shocked they are, like, oh, she wants to hear more from me. Like, I'm on the right track. Way to go. And that validation, it's amazing. Then they start to volunteer answers, and they start to speak, and they start to get involved. Then you can bring them to do things like defend their positions. Like, well, why do you feel that way? And why do you think that's important? And so redirecting, responding, and moving around the classroom really helps to get that information. Then they're processing the information and not having to just sit passively. The idea is to keep them involved. Okay, and now Barb's going to talk about the third step.
The third step, practice before assessment. To master any skill, and especially higher level thinking skills, practice is necessary. And the more you do this, the better you become. So in this particular step, the 3 tasks are to choose active learning activities, to use primary and secondary sources, and to link the activities to the learning objectives and the assessment. So to make learning more active, teachers need to use experiential learning and reflection. Those are both direct types of activities that can be used. A reflection, an experiential learning activity is any activity that is hands-on, where the learner gets direct experience with a particular concept. So for example, you might, as experiential learning, have the students create a project, maybe a brochure that they're going to create for some company. That would be experiential. A reflective type of direct activity would be something like writing a paper, creating and maintaining a journal, maybe doing online or some sort of discussions in the classroom, online, creating service learning projects. And a very important one in our process is self-evaluation. The learner needs to take time to self-reflect about their learning process, what they've learned, what they still need to learn. Indirect activities that can be used are activities that simulate an experience. So for example, you want to allow students to apply some new concepts that they've learned, and you have them apply that to like a case study, something where they try to apply what they've learned to a simulated situation. While practicing, always a good idea that students learn to use both primary and secondary data. Being able to research information, find out what is said about your topic, about your content, is very, very important. And then the next step is creating your own information, taking that information and maybe going out and researching and coming up with new ideas, new theories, new thoughts. Of course, that's what keeps us, lifelong learning, keep on learning new things. And then the last task, linking those activities to learning objectives to be assessed. You want to be able to give the student or the learner the opportunity to demonstrate that they have achieved what your objectives are. So you have to create those activities that will give them that practice to prove that, to demonstrate success.
Okay, step 4. Step 4 is to review, refine, and improve. And this comes sort of second nature to us because we're in the business field, and where continuous improvement is just sort of always a common theme in everything we do. We're always looking at what we're doing. How can we do differently? And how did we do? And we're always doing that. It's a very important part of this process so that you can continue to make the best learning experience for the students. So to do that, you want to monitor class activities, and you really have to go beyond just kind of having a sense for how things are going. You have to be purposeful about it. Then you want to collect feedback from your students about how things are going, and then and how they're learning. And then you want to offer opportunities for relearning. And remember, this is before we're assessing them, so we're going to give them lots of opportunities here. So to monitor class activities, the first thing that says is create a supportive environment. I always try to do that from day one. I try to let them get to know things about me, whether they want to or not. I have my intro class ask me questions, and I love it, but I'm answering stuff like, what's your favorite Star Wars movies? And some of them I have to think about. Like, if somebody asked me about the Harry Potters, and I was at which school would I have gone to? And I hadn't read any. I had to go research it. I had to go ask our geeky colleague, Tori, who lives across the hall, and she has read them all, yeah. So, let them get to know you, you get to know them, you create this supportive environment where they feel free to participate. Clear expectations, I already mentioned that. I always say I expect everybody to participate. And if I have a student, I literally once in a while have a student say, I pass. And I'm like, no, you don't get to pass. You don't get to pass in life. You know, people care what you think. You have an opinion. You know, you don't get to pass. So I always tell them that outright. And you can do that online in an announcement or syllabi or in a class meeting. You want to track the participation. That's pretty easy to do in online classes because you can look at statistics. We're looking at all sorts of things about students all the time. There's a lot of theories about putting groups together. You might get the students who posted earliest to be the group leaders, and so there's some hints there. Students like if you're the first to post, I'm looking at you for a group leader because I'm thinking you're going to be together and get stuff done.
And by the way, that is a good thing.
It's
a good thing.
It's a good thing. But there's lots of different ways. When I'm face to face, we'll make a little note in my attendance if somebody's participating. They get a sense for who's participating until I really get to know them. So there's a lot of great ways to do that, and that can help you refine your instructional techniques as well. Then I like to collect feedback from my students. In fact, I just did a unit on database, which I think in my intro class is one of the hardest things that I teach them, but it's one of the most valuable things that they get. Students get jobs in that area, make tons more money than I make, and so it's a great area, and I always tell them that all you have to really know is what it means, and you're good to go. And so when I'm done, I say 2 minutes, write everything you know about databases. And they just like, right, and then I can look at those and I get a sense for what they thought was important, what they latched onto. Sometimes I'm surprised. And then the opportunities to relearn it. After I do that assessment, in this particular class, I flipped the classroom. So they're reading and doing some activities outside of class. They come in, I do a reading accountability. I make sure everybody's read. I do a little quiz or a true-false. Like I literally give them T's and F's, and they have to answer my true-false questions. And so once I know they've read, then we do some kind of an activity. And at the end of that activity, then I do an assessment. And I almost always have some opportunity. I'll say, what questions do you still have? And this database, it's really important that I do that because a lot of them really don't get a couple of the concepts like normalization or I still don't really get that primary foreign key thing. And so then I do that on the Friday, and then I look at them over the weekend, and then on Monday I spend the first 5 or 10 minutes going, okay, it looked like a lot of people were having trouble with this primary key thing, so let's go back through that. And so it's really ongoing, and it allows you to kind of be in touch as you go and constantly be review, refine, and improve. It's not, you don't have to wait till it's all over to be keeping things moving. Okay, Barb, you're on to the very last step.
The very last step is to provide feedback and assessment of learning. And this involves several things. The first thing is feedback to the students, letting the student know how they are doing. And we talk about 3 different methods of student feedback. There is the teacher evaluation, teacher feedback, and that can be placed in various ways. You can have a pre-test, post-test. You can have a teacher identify particular traits or skills or standards that they expect from the student. You can have examples, provide students with examples of quality work so that they know what the standard is, what is expected of them. And then feedback to them. Did you meet this? Is this okay? What needs to be improved? The second type of feedback to the student can be in the form of peer review. Peer review, you might have your students review the work of other students and provide quality, constructive criticism to other students, which is part of life. It's something that they need to learn to do. You need to learn to be able to say, hey, this would look better. Should you do this with this particular thing? And they need to get in the habit of doing that. Wendy does a really neat thing in her graduate course with peer review. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. Joe, this is a little insight for you. It's coming up. He's in my class right now. One of the things that happened to me was, well, I do a project, and it used to be every week, and it used to be every week, not every other week, it used to be every week, and they would turn in these papers, and in a graduate class, I'll say minimum of 2 pages, and I'll get 11. And I was going through, and I was giving them comments on APA, and on their grammar, and on the content, and I was really, really wanted them, then to look at it, and then do the second part, and then look at it, and then when they put it all together, they had all these comments to have this terrific paper at the end. And then I taught it in summer, and then the numbers exploded, and I couldn't keep up with it, and I felt completely run over. In fact, I'm teaching 72 at this point now this summer, and I'm thinking, how am I going to do it? So peer review was one of the ways that I tackled that. I decided once they put all that paper together, I've already looked at each part. I've made it a 3-part thing now, and I just look at it every other week, and so far I'm able to get their feedback back before the next one is due. But I really spend a lot of time because I really want them to learn and to be able to apply it and then do better the next time. By the third one, the things they produce are tremendous, and they're very, very different than
And
the
wouldn't
first
be
ones.
there without that feedback.
I don't think so. So when I do the peer, anyway, that's why I did the peer review. And so what I do then, just before they're due in week 7, and we do 8-week classes, so in week 7, I have them put all 3 of those parts together in one paper, and then they post them in the discussion. And then I provide guidelines, and I say that for your grade for the discussion this week, you have to choose 3 papers, and try to choose papers that not a lot of people have reviewed, so everybody gets some comments. And then here's what we're looking for, and then go through and provide a peer review. And the literature tells us that students care far more what their peers think than what we think. So before I grade those papers, I've already looked at the content, I already know what it's going to be, but when they put that all together, and it's amazing what they do, and they help each other. So then everybody's looking at 3 papers. Everybody goes, wow, I didn't do that in my paper. I think I'm going to add that to, And so it really, it seems to be working well. And it took a lot of the pressure off me because the numbers in my grad class were so high. So then all I had to do is look at final papers, and I can't believe the difference, those final papers. And then if they're MBA students, they have to write an graduate quality 10-page paper for us in APA, and the ones that have been through things like this go easy. And the other ones sometimes kind of struggle. So they have an opportunity to do something in practice. But the idea is that I provide them very specific. I don't just say, go review it, but I say, here's what you're looking for. Because a lot of them will go, great paper, loved it. Well, that isn't going to help anybody. Oh, you missed a comma here, and I think the APA level 1 heading is bold, and those kinds of things are really helpful. And then they won't lose the points in the end. So that was a long-winded version.
Yes, it was, and you're stealing my thunder, so
sorry.
Please give this back to me, and I'll move on to the next step of this, or task in this step, and that is student self-assessment. You need to give the students the opportunity to determine their own success. And part of the way that I do that in my courses is every single assignment has a grading rubric. And the students have that up front. They see that grading rubric, and I encourage the student to create their assignment, whatever that may be. It may be a project, it may be writing a paper, whatever that is, to go through that assignment and check it against the grading rubric before they ever submit it. Because they can find their own errors, they can find their own things that need to be corrected, and know their own learning, which is a very valuable part to this process. And then the last part of this step is utilizing the feedback to improve your instruction. And some of the things that you want to ask as the instructor or the teacher of this situation is, were the objectives met? Can you look at each student and say, the objective was met for that student? How do you gather that information? You might ask the student, gather information from them, interview the student. You can look at test results, test scores. You can look at your specific learning activities. I know when I teach, I'll do an activity, and at the end of that activity, I'll either come away feeling very, very good or not so good. And I decide, okay, that activity did not work very well, so what can I do different the next time? Or that one did work. You might find out that one works for one group of students, and that same one does not work for a different group of students. But those are all just learning things that you go through when you are looking at those particular activities. And then, of course, you always want to compare the feedback that you have to standards. So we're talking here about standards such as student ratings of the instructor, although in reality, I've taught for about 25 years now, I would really like student evaluations to come years down the road instead of right after they've taken the course, because they don't really understand exactly what they learned in that course just yet. But you can gather a lot of feedback from those student evaluations of the teacher. Other things are outside observers can help you with assessing your courses and whether you met the objectives, and of course accrediting bodies. We in the business department are accredited by ACBSP, and right now we're going through a self-study to try to prove that we are teaching our students what we tell that we are teaching. So those are all ways to do that.
Yay, we're done. At this point, we usually, in our workshops, we usually would challenge everyone to think a little bit and consider some of the techniques we talked about. We obviously didn't get into a lot of the specific how-tos in a lot of these areas, but to think about how they're teaching and to think about even what little changes they could make. It really takes a commitment to active learning, to wanting to engage the students, to helping them become more responsible for their own learning. It requires a learner-centered environment, so you have to step back from wanting to be the sage on the stage, and it really takes a change in some cases in technique. But that change really will prove beneficial. My test course in my intro class, just this year I tried something different all the time, and this year is the first time I tried flipping the classroom and having them read and do everything outside, and then I set a scenario. I make sure they've read about through the reading accountability, and then I'll go, okay, there was a computer breach today, and you're on the the CERT team, which in my field is a computer emergency response team, and now you got to figure out what to do. And so then I developed this sort of activity. They've already read it. I know they've read it because I've held them accountable through a quiz or something. And then I'll say, okay, it's time to, first, I want to know if they understand it. So I say, okay, first you need to do a press release, and you need to explain to the public what this means. And then I'll say, now you need to come up with an action plan so I'm moving them through those critical thinking, but they come in and they're active from the word go. I'm not just repeating what they read. And it's putting that onus on them to have to do the reading outside of class, but then they start to. What I found was, I've tried this before, but what I found is you really have to explain what you're doing, because then they're kind of like, hey, you're making us do it on our own. And you're like, hey, there's a reason. There's a good reason for it. Yeah. Anyway, it requires some work, but it is so worth it to see them get engaged, to see them role playing and thinking about what they would do. And they really do. I have some freshmen doing things that our MBA students are doing. I mean, they're creating porters, evaluations for companies, and they're really surprised at what they already know. And so it's so worth it, and the benefits to the teachers, the administrators, to the accrediting bodies, it's far better proof that you're teaching and they're learning, and it's just really, it's been a very beneficial thing.
Very rewarding. However,
you knew she'd have the last word. she had it, and I said, no, I want it. I want the last word. She gets the mouse, she gets the last word.
Okay. And it's been that way for the last 10 years.
Yes.
Okay.
I've learned to live with it.
We love to do this together. Okay. So we do believe that even the best, greatest teachers cannot guarantee learning. That it does fall on the shoulders of the student. The student must take responsibility for their own learning. But we think that when you can get students to think critically, that will improve their quality of education, and that will become lifelong learning. So, any questions? That was a whole lot of stuff in a short amount of time.
So how do you get the student who wants to answer all the questions and dominate the conversation? in a classroom where a lot of students feel a little
No,
intimidated.
you don't say shut up.
No, I don't want that.
Sean could get away with that, but well, one of the things that I read just recently about dealing with the overtalkative student was to try to put them in a mentor mentality, so that you say, well, let me ask this question. You might pick someone or pick a part of the classroom. A lot of times I'll try to draw it away from that part. And I'll say, well, can you define this? And then I'll say, well, what do you think of what they said? Or how do you, so I kind of try to honor that they want to be a part of it,
Yeah.
but I let other people provide the information and then let them sort of build on it. And then it sort of still honors their place, because they want to talk because they're prepared and they know, and you don't want to dismiss that.
Give them a different role.
Exactly. That's what I think has worked best for me. And sometimes I will actually just say, let's let somebody else answer this one, or let's ask somebody from this side of the room. So sometimes you have to be a little more direct.
I think those are the types of students that are easier to help get through the allowing other people to do their part in the course too. I think the hardest part is the shy student, the one that is afraid to speak. And I don't know, I've tried different things, and part of it is, you've got the answer to this, why don't you tell us your viewpoint of this? Or I might have somebody else answer then when they're still sitting there and still not coming up with anything, and then go back to that student and say, now can you add anything to that? I think that's harder. It has been in my experience.
Well, and I was a shy student, so I'm more comfortable with that situation, but I start with small groups and have them part.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of like the think, pair, share. Like, think about it and write it down. Now, turn to the person next to you and talk about it. So now they've been validated. They know what they're going to say isn't stupid. And then they go, okay, I'm on the right track. And then they're far more to share it. And so I notice those people, and when I do that, ask me any question you want to, I also ask them what I should know about them, and something that will help me remember them, and then what I should know about them. And I'm surprised how many say I don't like to talk. And I don't like to talk in front of the class, or I'm really shy, or or I sleep in, or I'll always have my coffee. I mean, it's just like that. It's if you pay attention to that, then you can catch those shy people before, and you can't catch the over-talkative ones too much. But it takes all kinds, and it really is a lot of work to keep it moving around the classroom with a big class. That's why I oftentimes break them down into groups. And when I have them working in groups, I have them all equally. Everybody has to write everything. And then I say, I say number off 1 through 4, or A, B, C, D, and I'll say, at the end I'll tell you whose paper I'm going to pick up to grade for your group. And so they make sure everybody has the right answer and everybody stays engaged. And so to me that has worked tremendously, because they're all accountable. Because if you have the slacker in your group and they're not writing or doing it, you see them. You get group papers, and this one wrote a paragraph and this one wrote 4 words, and they were in the same group. Those people are going to go, no, she takes yours. You're going to write more than 4 words. And it really makes everybody accountable. So there's lots of
responsible.
There's lots of great techniques. And one of the things we did mention that we're working on is a handbook, and we really want to put all this together. And there's so many great ideas and active learning. We've done pieces of this at different conferences. We did the last one was just active learning, and we just went through all these active learning ideas. And so each of these are just lots of great ways to accomplish these, which we don't have time to cover, but
our plan is to create a handbook,
create something where it has a lot more detail
that really goes into detail on each of the 5 steps and different activities, different things you can do to create and meet that particular step. And in our mind, we've got it all there. And
we have lots, and
about
we presented so much on each of these parts,
Yes.
and so many times that it's there. It's just.
So
She would only give us an hour.
So business, correct?
Correct.
Teach business. So then, just a couple of things. What do you do for a different type of class? Let's say English, history, science, because I know in the past, I'm being a student here, a lot of my teachers don't teach like this. And I sit there and I
That's why we talk at a lot of conferences, because a lot of
things
people.
that they do, and that this can be used in any discipline, in any setting, not just business, I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely,
This
yeah.
can be used as a tutor. This can be used in any discipline, in any program, any curriculum.
Including, okay, so I'm gonna be a teacher, like elementary, middle
Uh-huh.
school?
And you
Including all the way
can do
down.
this.
No question, yeah. You
Yeah,
have to know
you
what you
want to
want to
do
teach
this.
and what activities will get them there and how can they be a participant in that and ask them questions and.
So, coming from this standpoint and then seeing teachers who don't teach like that, how do you deal with that? Or do you ever
Remember,
talk
we
to
can be
them?
great teachers, but it's the responsibility of the student. We can have really good teachers and we can have really poor teachers. It's just like anything in life. I mean, you can have a good waiter or a poor waiter at your table. I mean, you know, you just try to get them on board and doing that sort of thing.
There's always going to be the traditional professors that want to profess what they know, I think, and I don't know that it's even our place to overcome something like that. And I think a lot of times we teach like we were taught. And if you never
we
know any
don't
different,
anymore.
well, you know.
Yeah, but we don't, because we were taught, we were professed.
But
Well, I
we're
was,
unique.
you're younger.
Thank you.
She wanted me to say that.
She always tries to say I could be her sister. But I kind of such I thought. But I think that you know, you have to sort of be inspired a little bit. We try to inspire and we try to talk to people and I think that if you see it in action and students start to sort of expect it and demand it, I know that when I first started doing active learning many years ago, I would do a little bit of lecture because I thought, no way they'd get this if I didn't tell them all about it. And so I'd lecture and they'd be like, and then I'd be like, wow, they're really not into this like I am, you know? And then I'd do an activity, and so I started just doing one activity. And then a couple weeks later, I'd do another one. And then they'd be like, there's not enough activities. But when I used to do straight lecture, nobody'd say a word. Because it was like, oh, okay. So what that told me was they want to be more active. And as you are more active in more classes, then I think teachers will go, wait a minute, how come you have such a great reaction? And what can I do? And our campus has offered many, many great opportunities for us through our Teaching Learning Center and other, you know, Barb and I have participated in some of their book clubs and things like that. There's a lot of great opportunities if people are willing to do it. I mean, you can't make people, they teach like they're supposed to, but Barb and I are unique in that we came up through teacher education like you are, and we learned about things like this.
And how to reach the various students and their styles.
And so it matters, but if you said Blooms to some finance person straight out of business, they'd be like,
What is
Blooms?
that? Yeah.
Is that on the NASDAQ? You know, no. But we've had administrators want this because of that, because they have so many faculty that don't have a background in teaching. Like, how do they know their students are critically thinking?
I wanted to mention about assessment. And I was just kind of curious, like, how do you change the student's mentality from focusing on their GPA to like actually enriching their learning process?
A lot of persuasion, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, I start from day one.
Yeah.
I say, don't just think about what you're doing here. Don't recite things from the book. Don't write it directly from the book. Always be asking yourself, how am I going to use this? Because I said, what I hope you get out of this class is something you can use, something you can put in your toolbox to take out to the real world and use. And that's why I started using these scenarios, because managers are very often the leaders of those CERT teams, not IT people. Because IT people want to throw technology at everything. And that's not the way to do that. You have to manage a situation like that. You have to let the PR department, deal with situations like that. So I'm just like, how can you use that? And so porters is porters, but how are you going to use that? And so I'm always saying, and in fact, the way even I word my questions on exams are, so what would you do if you're in this situation? So it's a constant
Changing the way
thing,
you ask
but it
the
really is a big difference from how a lot of them have learned in high school. And
another thing that I do in my courses from the very beginning is I say, your grades might not be where you want them to begin with, but the final grade will be determined based on your improvement. How much have you learned, and what can you show me that you've learned through the assessments from day one to the last day? And in our department, we only have 8 weeks to do that because we're on the 8-week format. But I am looking for that improvement of the student, and when they can show, a large amount of improvement, their final grade's going to show that as well. But the more concern is, what did you learn? Did you really learn this? Can you apply this information? And I say it over and over again in class.
Yeah, I
I tell them all the time
yeah.
because I want them to think that way.
And college degrees are really a dime a dozen, and it's not about having the college degree, it's about what do you know? And, you know, you're competing with lots of people. You're competing with people who graduated from Harvard and Wayne State and all sorts of other places. But it's about what you know.
You
It's
used to
about
just
what you
need
know.
to have that piece of paper.
Yeah, it's a
Now
global. It's a
there's
global
so many people with that
competition.
piece of paper
Yeah.
that you've got
You have to
go
have
beyond.
it, but now you have to prove that you can
Yeah.
perform.
And the reason I asked about like the GPA mentality is that sometimes, and as a student I can relate, just adapting yourself to the professor's criteria to get a good grade, because, you know, that's the objective. But I really like your standpoint, your perspective, your passion about the learner-centered environment for education.
Well, that's how they're going to retain it and really soak it in. But there will always be professions that are very GPA oriented, medical professions, things like that are just going to really always put a lot of emphasis on that one measure. And in fact, I can remember over many years the honors program struggling with students going, I don't want to take the honors class because I can't chance my GPA. And, you know, there's always been things like that, you know, because I want to be a dentist, or and I have to have a perfect this or that. And so they're almost afraid to challenge themselves. And so some of those outside influences, I don't know.
I told a personal story to this lady over here before this started. And
This isn't the Jack Daniels one.
No, this isn't anything to do with that. My first B on my graduate work was the most devastating thing that ever happened to me. As a matter of fact, I think I'm still bitter about it, as you can tell, because I was an A student and I got a B. And it hurt. It really, really hurt. But honestly, it was the very best thing that ever happened to me. And I can say that and feel good about saying that, although I still am mad that I got that B. But I didn't know it. I did not know statistics, and I got a B. That was the best I could do. And once I got that B and I realized I don't know it, and I'm getting close to writing my dissertation and thinking, I've got to know statistics or I'm not going to be able to do this, I retook the course, earned an A, felt good about it because I really did now know it and I could apply the information. So the grade doesn't mean as much as, do you know it? Do you know the information? I don't know.
Any other questions?
All right, I got one. When you're like writing your assessments or doing your assessments, what are your strategies, I guess? Are your guys' strategies different between the two of you?
Probably. I teach in the information systems area, and she teaches more in communication. So she probably has a lot more emphasis on writing, and I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
But, well, for me, it's about alignment. I'm looking at my objectives, and I'm trying to figure out, am I measuring that? And of course, we did all those things in between. So everything I did with the questions and everything I did with activities, all I hope are leading up to my assessment. And so I'm going to look at all those things, and I'm going to look at what I want to measure, and that's what I'm going to ask the questions on. So everything, it just follows that line. And when I started, I took the Quality Matters class, and what I started looking at was some of the activities I were doing were fun and sort of related, but not directly related to the assessments. And in 8 weeks, those have to go. You have to stick with the things that they need to know to move forward. And so my strategy is to look at what I said I wanted them to learn. I have them for every single unit, and I have them for the course. And those for the unit tied directly into the 2 or 3 for the course. And then my finals almost always are reflective in nature, and I have them reflect on those outcomes and tell me whether why they think they met them.
I teach business communications and an ethics course undergraduate, and the types of assessment are totally different in those two courses. So I think you have to change your assessments for the type of course, the discipline that meets the objective. So you can't just say there's one way to do it, the assessment.
Well, thank you. Very well done and very informative.
Thanks.